So a is 5 as my y-intercept when x is 0. And what's my growth factor? What is each subsequent term getting multiplied by? 3. So here's your equation. F of x equals 5 times 3 to the x power. Y-intercept of 5, multiplier, growth factor of 3. Simple enough? Any questions? Okay. Here's an exponential function of the form that we're working with. It is known that f of 0 equals 8. Jack Birmingham, what does that tell me? If f of 0 equals 8. 8 is the y-intercept, so what letter in my function is 8 going to go in for? A. Very good. So immediately, I have f of x equals 8 times some growth factor to the x power. Now, how am I going to figure out my growth factor? Some of you are probably going to be able to just figure it out. Who thinks they can just figure it out? Maybe not. So I'm going to give you, oh, Chris. Which would mean a growth factor of 125. Okay, so 1,000 divided by 8 is 125. So by your logic, 0 goes with 8. I'm just kind of recreating a table. And then 1, if you're multiplying by 125, you would already be 1,000. You're too fast. We don't want to get to 1,000 until we get to 3. We want 3 to be 1,000. Let me give you a different way then. Do you remember with equations of lines, 2 points was really all you needed to write the equation of a line in y equals mx plus b? Right? You would use your 2 points to find the slope, and then you would plug in one of those points, x and y, with the slope that you calculated to find the b. 2 points is all you need here. If you know that when x is 0, y is 8, we're going to plug that in. That'll give us 8 equals a times b to the x power. But it's not the x power, it's the 0 power. So x is 0, y is 8. And then I'm going to plug in my second point where x is 3, y is 1,000. So my equation was essentially y equals a times b to the x. So I plugged in xy, 0, 8, and I plugged in xy, 3, 1,000. So far, so good? So this is like a system of equations almost, but you're going to solve it totally differently because you can't do substitution or elimination. I'm going to take those two equations and I'm going to divide them by each other. So 8 divided by 1,000, I'm just going to keep 8 1,000ths. What's a divided by a? Cancels, right? A divided by a just cancels. What's b to the 0 divided by b to the third? What's the exponent rule? If you're dividing common bases, what do you do with the exponents? So what's 0 minus 3? B to the negative third. Okay? Now here's a new, I don't know if this is a new solving technique or not. But if you want to get rid of an exponent, there's certain exponents you guys just get rid of naturally. Like if something was x squared equals 9, you would just take the square root, wouldn't you? When you take the square root, though, that's the same as raising something to what power? 1/2. When you take the square root, that's the same as raising to 1/2 power. That's the reciprocal of the exponent, because when you multiply power by power, multiplying reciprocals will give you 1. So what's the reciprocal, if we want to get rid of that -3, what's the reciprocal of -3? -1/3. Very good. You'd raise both sides to -1/3 because that's the reciprocal. And the beauty of that reciprocal is that when you multiply reciprocals, -3 times -1/3 is just 1. So it's just b to the first power, which is b all by itself. That was our goal, was to solve for b. Do we follow? Okay. And then just type in on your calculator 8/1000ths and raise that to the -1/3 power, and you get 41 2/3. Did everybody see that? Oh shoot, I lied. Do you see why mine's wrong? What did my calculator do? Right, my calculator, because I didn't put the exponent in parentheses, raised it to the -1st power and then divided the answer by 3. If I raise it to the -1/3 power, I get 5. So b is 5, and I already knew that a was 8. So there's my answer. Yes? Okay, so that's going to be the method we use if we're given 2 points. Plug it into the structure, divide the functions. Okay, so to write, we're going to plug in 2 points and divide the functions. And then now that we see that we've gotten a multiplier of 5, what would that next term have been? 40. And then what would that next term be? 200. And then, does that make sense now? 200 times an additional 5 gets you to 1,000. Okay, so plug in your 2 points, divide the functions. And now this says find f of 2, which I did in the chart already, but I could just plug in 2. 5 squared is 25. 25 times 8, 200. Any questions on that? That's how you write equations of exponentials. Plug in your 2 points, divide the functions. Any questions? Okay. So here we are again. We have an equation. Now this one, we weren't so blessed to get the y-intercept, were we? We have 2 totally random points. At least with this last one of them was the y-intercept. But we're going to follow the same technique. We're going to plug in the 2 points. So Morgan, when I plug in 236, what will my equation be? Two is an x-coordinate. 36 is a y-coordinate. So 2 goes in for x and 36 goes in y. A times b to the x, where'd your 2 go? Two is not your b. Yes. 36 equals a times b to the second. Can you do the second one for me now? Plug in the second point. Perfect. So I plug in the 2 points and then do what, Owen? Right, go back up to your steps, divide. So when I do my division, I'm going to get, now 36 over 121.5 is not going to be nice, so I'm just going to leave it there. A divided by A will cancel. And what's b squared divided by b to the 5th, Jason? No. b to the second divided by b to the fifth. B to the negative third. Very good. So far, so good. Now, Angie, what would I do to solve this for b? I don't multiply it by it, I raise it to that reciprocal power, to reciprocal power. So I'm going to raise it to the negative 1/3 power on both sides. So I'm going to get that b equals, we'll make sure I don't screw this one up, 36 divided by 121.5, and then raise it to, since my exponent is a fraction, I'm going to keep that in parentheses too. How many of you do alpha y equals? And so you don't have that problem, do you? Yeah. But this works too, and you get the b equals 1.5. Now, the trouble on this one, it's not really trouble, it's just I don't know what a is still. So far, here's where I am. Y equals a times 1.5 to the x power. But I'm going to treat this just like I would treat linear things if I'm looking for the y-intercept on linears. Remember with y equals mx plus b, if you know the slope and you know a point, you plug in the slope, you plug in the point, and you can find your y-intercept. We're going to do the same thing. We know our multiplier, or our growth factor. We know a point. Half of us could plug in 236. The other half could plug in 121.5. We should all still get the same a value. I'm going to plug in 236 just because they're smaller. So again, y is 36, x is 2, and then I'm just going to solve for a. So Vince, what would I have to do first to solve this equation for a? What would I have to do to get a all by itself? I don't want to divide a over. Usually you want to divide things away from a. You don't really usually want to touch a. Right, divide the 1.5 squared over. If you wanted to, you could figure out what that number is first. Doesn't really matter to me though. 36 divided by 1.5 squared. 16. So now we have a, and now we can write the whole function. Y equals 16 times 1.5 to the x powered. Good? Natalie, one quick question for you. If I took 16 and multiplied it by 1.5, this times this gives me 24 to the x power. Right or wrong? What's that? Why can't I do that? Right, the 1.5 has to be written. The order of operation says exponents has to happen before multiplication. So I can't multiply those because then I'd inadvertently be bringing the 16 to the x power as well, and I don't want to do that. So keep it separate. So what's the y-intercept of this function? 16. Is it growth or decay? Growth, because that's greater than 1. Good? Let's jump to exercise 5 just because this is more of the same. Writing the equation. This is more of the same. Find the equation of the exponential function shown. Let's go to the exercise 6 then. Sorry, it kind of copied funny. Looks better on paper than it does up on the board. Okay, a colony is growing at an exponential rate. It is known that after 4 hours, its population is at 98, and after 9 hours, it is 189. determine an equation that models the population Y as a function of the number of hours X. Okay, so we're going to do that first, and then we'll get on to the last question. We're just going to determine the equation. In order to write an equation, we need 2 points. Sierra with A, C. What are my 2 points? Perfect. You have to know to take that language and turn it into points. They did tell us X was the number of hours and Y was the number of bacteria. So go ahead and get started and start finding your A and your B. So here's the thing, B is a decimal, right? You all are getting that? B would end up being a decimal. If some of us round to the nearest 10, and some of us round to the nearest 100, some of us round to the nearest 1,000, that's going to affect all of our y-intercepts. They'll be in the same ballpark, but they will all be slightly different. So let's say round your B to the nearest 100th and use that. Yeah, sure. Do A to the nearest 100th also. Okay. When you're dividing common basis, I'm going to say do that when you're round everything to the nearest 100. On a scale of 1 to 10, let's tell Georgia how hard is this. So on a scale of 1 to 10, Olivia, what are you giving? A 1? All right. A 4. Okay. Yeah. Your B value should be 1.14. You're not getting that. 1.14. Now you have to use that to find your A. Right? There's an A and a B that has to be found. Okay. Yours is a little off. Because you did that. You found the answer. Just do it all in one shot. 98 divided by 1.14, fourth power. Use the exact number instead of divided by around the version of it. Your A value should be 58.02. Yes? Can I give it to you? Yes. Good. Jason, okay, so I'm going to fly through this. So here's y equals a times b to the x. Sometimes I will already know the y-intercept, and that's kind of a big advantage, right? If you already know the y-intercept, you're good, but I don't have an x-coordinate of 0, so I don't, unfortunately. So I'm going to plug in xy for the first one, plug in xy for the second one. I'm going to do my division. So I get 98 over 189. My a's cancel, and I get b to the negative fifth. Raised to the reciprocal. And I get b equals 1.14. So there's your b. So that kind of brings us back up to square one, except for now I have 1.14. Now, you could plug in 498 or 9189. It does not really matter. I'm just going to stick with the smaller numbers. And then here's where some people went wrong. Listen. They did 1.14 to the fourth power first. That was also an ugly decimal, and so they rounded that. And then they divided both sides by their rounded answer, and that threw it off. Divide both sides by the exact number, so you might as well type it in all in one shot, and you get A equals 58.02, we said? Yeah. Okay? Don't forget to actually write the equation. Just finding A and B is not writing the equation. Writing the equation is 58.02 times 1.14 to the x. So last question. At what percent is this growing? If you multiply by 1.14, by what percent is it growing? We're not quite there yet. It's going to be 14%. Because if you multiply by 1, you're not growing at all, correct? But if you multiply by 1.14, that 0.14 is the percentage over 1. We'll do more of that second part.